Chapter 6. Inside the protective cocoon of Luke Skywalker's secret hermitage, time had no meaning. To be sure, the elemental cycle of day and night was echoed in the ebb and flow of the Force, as the living web of Coruscant stirred and slept, fought and forged. The turning of the seasons was a longer, slower rhythm, an almost imperceptible crescendo and decrescendo of vitality and dormancy, fecundity and death. Beyond that, a mere whisper, lay the almost unimaginably deep, subtle echo that was the birth of stars, the creation and extinction of life, the blossoming of consciousness. Deep in meditation, profoundly connected to the mysteries of the Force, Luke could see that through the manifestations of life, the universe knew itself and beheld its own wonders. But to extend himself that far, and reach that degree of oneness, Luke found it necessary to let go of his everyday senses to a degree he once would have thought impossible. Sealed behind opaque walls, he lived in darkness for days at a time, barely conscious of hunger, thirst, or other bodily demands. He wore clothing only out of habit, but the habit weakened. The winds howled outside the hermitage, but Luke was oblivious to them. He took no notice of the sun or moons in their courses, the rise and fall of the tide, the ever-changing sky painted in light and cloud. The sea began to freeze as the northern hemisphere slid deeper into Coruscant's short winter. Over a period of many days, the rocks and beach were draped with a heavy crust of sculpted ice. But the sight would have surprised Luke had it mattered enough to him to seek it out. Even Leia had stopped reaching out for him, though more in anger than in understanding. The result mattered more to him than the reason. His solitude was complete, timeless, and undisturbed. Then a visitor came, and everything changed. It was his ordinary senses, reawakened, which informed Luke of the visitor's presence. First, a sound, which he later realized was his own name. At that point, it had been many days since he had spoken or even thought in words. He concentrated. Lights, medium. The meditation chamber reappeared around him. Sight told him that a woman stood in the chamber with him, half a dozen steps away. Her shoulders were bare, her throat covered by a long scarf that vanished down her back. Her hair was long and braided, her clothing soft and flattering. Her eyes were dark, intent, and knowing. He took her at first for a projection, because it was unthinkable that anyone could have passed through the walls, his screens, without alerting him. But then he touched her bare arm, and touch told him her skin was real and warm. He circled her, and scent told him of salt air, dead coral grass crushed underfoot, a body bathed in flowers, a hint of the taint of the old oils and clinging vapors that hung on one's person after a long flight. "Explain yourself," he said when he had circled around to face her again. "You are him. You are Luke, son to Anakin." She smiled with bright delight. "Forgive me. I thought I would never find you. It must have been the working when you built this place that I felt. That was what led me here." "You felt what I did? From where?" "From Karatas," she said, naming a planet in a system 40 parsecs from Coruscant. As rudely as his visitor had invaded his hermitage, Luke suddenly invaded her mind, probing the secret place where sensitivity to the Force resided. If she possessed the sort of talent her words claimed for her, he should be thrown halfway across the room when the ancient reflex repelled his mental touch. It was so with every Jedi he had probed, every candidate he had brought to Yavin for training. Luke's probing met no resistance. He felt no shields blunting or deflecting his examination. Her mind was open, and yet there was no reflexive response. So sure was he of that test that he wouldn't have considered her for a moment as a candidate for the Academy. But still, she had found him. She had, somehow, entered a space she should not have been able to enter unless her gifts in the Force were the equal of his. "Who are you?" he asked wonderingly. She laughed. "Forgive me. I am Akana, of the Falanasi, an adept of the White Current." "I'm afraid I don't know your people, or that path," he said. "I know," she said. "You won't find us in your census, or the Emperor's, or the old republics. It's not our way to claim lands and raise flags, or stand queue to be counted. But you should know us. That's part of why I've come." His brows showed puzzlement. "If your people are such ciphers, why should I know you?" "Because your mother is one of us, Luke Skywalker. Because you are bound to us through her." Luke stared. "My mother? How can... What do you mean, is one of us? Leia told me my mother is dead." "Yes, I know. As Obi-Wan told you that your father was dead." "Are you saying my mother might be alive?" "I don't know," said Akana, suddenly sad-eyed. "Who saw her fall? Where is her grave? I wish I could answer your question, but I don't even know my own mother's fate. I've been separated from the body of my people for too many years." "Separated? Why?" "I was away when the Empire came to the world we called home then. The Falanasi had to take flight because they would not let themselves and their gifts be used for violence and evil. I don't blame them. I know they must have waited for me as long as they could. That was 19 years ago. I was 12, not much more than a child." "And you never found them again?" There was a touch of suspicion in Luke's voice. "You found me?" She smiled tolerantly. "The Falanasi are more practiced at hiding than you are, Luke Skywalker. And there isn't much an abandoned child can do in the middle of a war to search for a family that doesn't want to be found." "I suppose not," he said slowly. "It wasn't until the Emperor was overthrown that I could even think of looking. I was too afraid I would betray them. And even then it's hard for a young woman on Karatas to become wealthy enough to leave it. Especially to leave in her own ship, owing and answering to no one." "So you're looking for them now? And you say my mother could be with them?" He shook his head. "My mother? She's been such a mystery to me my whole life that I can't let myself believe you know anything of her. I don't even know her name." "She may have had other names," Akana said. "Many of us do. But among the body she is known as Nashira. It is a star name and thought a high honor." "Nashira?" Luke echoed in a whisper. "Yes," she said. "Luke, I know that there's an emptiness inside you where memories of your mother should be, a weakness where what she would have taught you would have strengthened you." "Yes, there's an emptiness in my life too, and for the same lack. I've come here to ask you to go away with me and help me find our people so you and I can both be whole again." "I don't think I've ever been whole," said Luke, turning his face from her. "The pieces of my life were scattered by a storm before I ever had a chance to tackle the puzzle, and every missing piece that turns up completely changes the picture. I was alone, and then there was Leia, My sister. I was an orphan, and then there was Anakin, Vader, my father. He laughed to himself. I wanted to go to school just to get off the farm, and then my father's mentor came to me and taught me the secrets of a power I didn't know I had. I was the adopted son of a moisture farmer living next door to nowhere, and then there was a lightsaber, and enemies. The most powerful men in the galaxy who wanted me dead. Luke turned and looked back at Akana. I don't know if I'm ready to redraw the picture again. Maybe that's what keeps me from believing you. I want to know my mother, you're right about that, but maybe I'm just a little bit afraid to. And that's a feeling that I haven't felt in a long time. I knew when I came here that this would be a great shock, she said. But you must reclaim this piece of what you are. I don't know who you are, Luke said stubbornly. I don't know that anything you've said is true. Then I will tell you some things that you know are true, said Akana. Your father was lost to the dark side, and you were forced to try to kill him. You were nearly lost to the darkness yourself. That must weigh heavily on you, wondering if you carry his weakness. I've faced that test, Luke said defensively. And would you have survived it without Leia? Luke Skywalker had no answer for that question. Perhaps that is why you cannot let yourself love without fear, Akana said softly. Perhaps that is why you have no children of your own. You must fear that you will repeat your family's tragedy in another generation. You must fear that someday you will find yourself ready to kill your own son, and him ready to kill you. No, you must fear yourself. How could you not? How could anyone if he had walked your path? The bond that links you to all the horrors of Darth Vader's reign is a terrible burden. Is that not why you're here? She asked pointedly. Isn't that the meaning of this structure? You may have forgiven Anakin Skywalker, but you know the Republic can never forgive Vader for his crimes in the service of Palpatine. Luke was beyond denial. How do you know all this? He asked hoarsely. I've studied you, before I came here and since. Hero of the rebellion, Jedi Master, defender of the Republic, she said. Even on Karatos, we hear all the stories, and I saw in them all the things I've said to you. Turning half away from her, Luke shook his head. No, that can't be. I've voiced those fears to no one. No one. Akana glided closer. They're written in your eyes and lie heavy on your spirit. You'd see them yourself, but for the blindness we all have when we look in a mirror, she said. But remember this, Luke. Your strength in the Force did not come only from your father. The gift of the light came from your mother, and your mother was of my people. That is why your heart is telling you, you must come with me. Their eyes met. Luke felt her gaze like a light cast into the dark corners of his psyche. Her voice disarmed him. Her words unveiled him. She had taken down all his shields, and he was defenseless against her, his mind wholly open to her. But it was a strangely safe feeling. She already knew his most unthinkable thoughts, and still she held her hand out to him. Test me, if you must, Akana said. No, he said. It's not necessary. I will wait here, if you want to return to Yavin for your testing equipment, she offered. But I can tell you what you would see. Nothing. The white current is not the Force you know, only with a different name. But it is a manifestation of the All. I will teach you what I can. You assume a great deal. I speak from hope only. Will you come with me, Luke Skywalker? I don't know, he said. There's something I must do first. Someone I need to tell. Leia. Yes. Is there any reason I shouldn't? No reason, she said, and smiled. You said it was not necessary to test me. But that question... You're right, Luke agreed. If you'd said, no, this has to be our secret, I would have doubted you. But there's another reason I have to do this. I have no memories of my mother. Leia has but a few, no more than glimpses touched by emotion. There are more memories there. Nashira was protected, just as you were. I can believe that. But what you've already told me may be enough to unlock any hidden doors. Allow me to probe her mind with more success than I've had in the past, and to find another few glimpses of her here, he touched his temple with his fingertips, would mean a great deal. If you could tell me even more... I'm sorry. Akana's sudden smile was touched by humor. 15 years ago, you weren't important. Just Varanasi gossip. If I had known what was to come, I would have paid more attention. He laughed. Will you wait here while I go see Leia? Of course, she said. I've waited long enough for this night. I can wait a little longer for our journey to begin. Luke's flight suit felt strange on his body, both too loose and too confining. The E-wing looked like an inert sculpture in its hangar, covered by a fine, pale coating of dust that had fallen out of the still air. Artie, Luke said. Exit standby mode. Almost instantly, several lights of different colors glowed on the dome and faceplates of the astromech droid. A moment later, it gave an answering chirrup. Pre-flight the ship, Luke said, starting his own quick but thorough inspection. The droid whistled, and Luke glanced down at the display bar on his flight suit. Yes, you can stop monitoring the house systems, Luke said. R7-T1's response had the stridency of an alarm. Yes, I know there's someone in the house, Luke said, ducking under the left wing. Just leave some lights on and the upper passways open. She'll be fine. The E-wing passed both Artie's and Luke's checks with flying colors. Both the design and the example before Luke were relatively new, far more able and robust than the T-65 X-wing he had flown against the first Death Star at Yavin. And the E-wing he was about to climb into had been overhauled to factory new condition after its last taste of combat. Still, he hesitated. Technically, the E-wing was on loan to the Jedi Academy for training purposes, but only because there was no provision in the quartermaster's regulations for loaning a frontline starfighter to a civilian. Akbar had persuaded him that, given the unpredictability of life, it was far more sensible for him to have a fully armed E-wing at his disposal than an unarmed sprint, catch, or runabout. Think of yourself as a member of the Republic's militia, and a militiaman should have his weapon at home with him in the event he is called on again, Akbar had said. Luke had accepted that argument reluctantly. But in the months before he returned to Coruscant, he had become more and more uncomfortable in the E-wing's cockpit. It was a heavily armed killer, an intimidator, an unspoken threat wherever it appeared. As such, it represented a part of his life that he was trying to leave behind. His X-wing had fit him like a second skin, like an extension of himself. He had taken joy in flying it, even in battle. But that had been another, younger Luke. The E-wing was different. It was an embarrassment, an ugly set of clothes he was forced to wear when he went out in public. And he missed the familiar presence of R2, who simply did not fit, physically or electronically, in the E-wing's R7 astromech interface. One last time, he thought. Then maybe they'll let me give it back. Open the canopy, Artie, he said, and directed his concentration at the hangar's front wall. Seams appeared in the unbroken expanse of silicon and quartz crystal. and the wall opened on hinges that had not existed just moments before. Bitter air filled the hangar as the wind screamed past the opening. In the absence of a boarding ladder, Luke leaped lightly to the edge of the open cockpit and clambered in. As the canopy closed over him, he pictured in his mind the E-wing hovering a few hands above the hangar door and gliding silently out into the night. As he pictured it, it happened, except that the silence was broken by Artie's insistent squawking. There was no explaining to the rigid-minded astromech that hovering with no engines did not necessarily represent an emergency. "Power up, engines," Luke said. Artie cooed in relief and complied. Luke climbed out from the hermitage in a widening spiral, scanning the ground for further clues about his visitor. As he passed over the cliff for the second time, he spotted her ship, an elderly Verpine adventurer, resting 100 meters back from the precipice. "I can't believe I didn't hear that clunker coming," he thought. "Pre-Empire, lifting body design, hover jets for atmospheric mode." Memories stirred, crossed, linked. He heard Leia's impudent voice saying, "You came here in that thing? You're braver than I thought." That had been aboard the Death Star, the first time they'd met, when he'd seen himself rescuing a princess, not a long-lost sister. A long time ago. Luke pulled the stick hard over, and the E-wing wheeled nimbly toward Imperial City. With the thought directed ahead of him, he let Leia know he was coming. For now, he kept the reason to himself. He did not see Akina watching from the tower, her hopeful gaze following the track of the engine exhausts as the E-wing disappeared into the night. Without warning, Leia sat bolt upright in her bed, breaking Han's embrace. "What is it now?" he asked plaintively. "He's coming here tonight." "Who is?" "Luke." She threw back the soft, coppery sheet and climbed out of bed. "He's coming to see us." "How do you know?" "I heard his voice. You know, what you fondly refer to as that semi-mystical twin thing." "Well, he's not ringing the doorbell yet," Han said hopefully. "It'll take him a while to get here." Leia seemed not to hear him. "It's about time. All I have to do is tell him about the way the kids were today. That'll give him the whole catalog of problems." "Are you sure that's why he's coming?" "He said he needed to talk to me about family matters." Han received that news with a dubious expression. "I dunno, Leia. The kids aren't the only family you two have," he said, trying to dislodge her from her certainty without revealing where Luke was living. "Isn't it more likely to be something about your father?" "Why do you say that?" "I kind of got the impression he's still having trouble with some of that." "What?" "No, it's silly," Leia said dismissively. "Why should he feel guilty about what Father did under the control of the Emperor and the dark side? Luke forgave Father at Endor. You were there, you saw." Han frowned. "Well, maybe it didn't turn out to be that simple for Luke. After all, a few billion people around the galaxy are still pretty unhappy with dear old Dad." "You don't have to remind me about that," said Leia, shrugging into a white robe and tying the sash in a bow. "But I'm the one who has to deal with it, not Luke. I'm the one who gets accused and screamed at and threatened, not Luke. And I'm handling it." As she was speaking, she moved toward the bedroom door. When she reached it, she stopped and turned back toward Han, still sitting bare-chested on the bed in a jumble of sheets. "No, I'm sure you're wrong. That's not why Luke's coming here. He seemed excited, almost happy." Han surrendered. "All right, whatever you say. Where are you going?" "I've been keeping notes on the children. I want to bring them up to date before Luke arrives." She threw him a quick smile and disappeared through the doorway. "I guess we're done here, then," he said to himself. Sighing, he climbed out of bed. "I've got a bad feeling about this. Oh, yes, I do." Even in the middle of the night, it wasn't possible for Luke Skywalker to make a quiet visit to the Chief of State of the New Republic. The entire area surrounding the President's residence was secured airspace and protected by its own local shield generator. That ruled out a convenient landing right on the grounds, or even close by. Instead, Luke was directed to land his E-Wing on a military pad at Eastport. Even before he could climb out of the cockpit, a sizable crowd of ground crew and other port workers gathered at the pad. But it was different from the kind of crowds Han still drew. Everyone hung back, even after Luke jumped down from the cockpit to the tarmac. It was as though they couldn't pass up a chance to see Luke Skywalker, but were too intimidated by his status to risk trying to shake his hand, clap him on the back, or even speak to him. He felt less a celebrity than a curiosity, more a dead legend than a living hero. Luke wished they would all just go away. He had no interest in being celebrity or curiosity, legend or hero. "Security Protocol 1, Artie," he said. As the E-Wing's canopy and engine intake covers closed, Luke strode toward the air speeder, waiting for him just outside the landing circle. The crowd parted for him in silence. But their excitement buffeted him, and their ambivalence tore at him. He heard them whispering to each other, read their faces, and he filled in the rest. "Children, you'll never guess who I saw at the port tonight." "He's here. What did he say? How did he seem? Where did he go? I wonder what it means." The airspeeder was a standard government model with a speed governor, an altitude limiter, and a pilot droid at the controls. To Luke, it was as welcome a sight as an escape pod on a doomed ship. "President's residence, north entrance," Luke said. "He seemed so serious, so mysterious. He floated to the ground like a leaf. He was as close to me as I am to you. He smiled at me. I never thought I'd have a chance to meet him. You can tell just looking at him that he's a Jedi. You can tell just looking at him what he's been through." Luke closed his eyes in relief as the airspeeder took flight. While they were waiting for Luke, Han had lingered in the front rooms, thinking that he might be able to get to his friend first and warn him what his sister was expecting. But when the signal from the North Gatehouse finally came, Leia was past Han and out the door before he knew it. "Let him in," Han told the gate guard resignedly and hurried after his wife. He caught up just as Leia and Luke met on the North Garden Trail. "Leia," Luke said with a warm smile, and they embraced. "I knew you'd come," Leia said, kissing him on the cheek and taking his arm. "I knew you'd change your mind. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you. How long can you stay?" "We have some work to do together," Luke said. "I don't know how long it will take, and then I have some things to tell you." "Hello, Han." Luke clapped the taller man on the back with his free hand. "It's good to see you again." "You don't know the half of it, kid," Han said wryly. "Come on, let's go inside," Leia said. "Did they make you leave your bag at the gatehouse? That's so foolish of them." "I didn't bring a bag," Luke said. "I didn't plan on staying, but if it's too late for you, I can pass the night out here, and we can work in the morning. I've always liked these gardens." Leia stopped, turning toward Luke and frowning. "I think I've missed something here," she said. "The children are sleeping, at last. So we couldn't start work until morning anyway, but I'm sure it's going to take days, more likely weeks, to make any progress." "Leia, I haven't come to train the children. Didn't Han tell you my feelings on that?" "I told her," Han said. "Han told me you said it was my problem," Leia said. "And that was so unlike you that I was sure he'd gotten it wrong." Luke shook his head. "It suffers a bit for being condensed, but I suppose the kernel is still there," he said. "Leia, there's nothing I can do right now that won't make your lives and theirs harder in the long run. I've meditated on this for a long time. I'm sure this is the right decision." Then You came here because you want something? Not because we need help? I'm here because I may have some new information about our mother. Han was startled by Luke's words, but so far as he could see, Leia's expression didn't waver or soften in the slightest. What new information? She asked. Where does it come from? I don't want to tell you yet, Luke said. I'm hoping that you'll let me probe your mind again first. I have an idea of what to look for now. Her body language foretold her answer. She held herself back from him, arms wrapped around herself, her mouth hard, her eyes darting, angry. No, she said. Go back to wherever you came from. She turned abruptly and started back toward the residence. Leia, Han said, reaching for her as she neared where he stood. She eluded his touch with a twist and a sidestep. And you, if you take his side, you can go with him. Leia! Han's tone was plaintive now, and it had no effect. In moments, the two men were alone on the path. I thought I was just out of practice flying, Luke said with a sigh. For what it's worth, kid, she had a kind of a hard day, Han said. Leia's been negotiating with the same guy for a month now, and it's starting to drive her nuts. And I don't know how they do it, but the twins seem to know when she's not up to dealing with them and really push the limits. If she'd just draw on the Force, Luke said, shaking his head, it's inexhaustible. Well, she's not, for whatever reason. I guess you'd better come back. No, Luke said. I'm going to talk to her. She has to realize how important this is to both of us. Kid, I can't recommend it. It'll be all right, Luke said, and started up the path. The valet droid helpfully told Luke that Leia was in the private kitchen. He found her sitting on a stool at the meal bar, cupping a tall glass in both hands and staring out the window with faraway eyes. That's perfect, she said as he entered. I was just trying to remember if you'd ever done anything I asked you to. Once or twice, by accident, he said lightly, hoping to draw a smile from her. But we made it through anyway. Leia said nothing, choosing instead to sip from her glass. This is important for both of us, Leia. For your children, too, Luke said. His glance acknowledged Han, who had followed as far as the doorway and taken up a position, leaning, arms crossed, against the frame. I think there really might be a chance to break through and discover our mother as a real person. Why? She turned her face toward him for the first time, and he saw the weariness in her eyes. You've probed me more times than I can remember. You had R2 and 3PO on Obrasky for months, searching the libraries for any clue. She emptied her glass and set it down on the bar. You and I sat in a Jedi meditation circle for hours on end, night after night, calling on Obi-Wan and Anakin and Yoda, Owen and Beru, my foster parents, anyone we knew of who might have known her. Calling her, too, remember? I remember. And when we were done, we knew exactly as much as we had before. A conspiracy of silence, you called it. It seemed that way, Luke said. But I think the silence has just been broken. I think I know why we never found any trace of her. You're obsessed with the past, she said, her tone sharp. I just can't let myself keep caring that much. Father and Mother are dead, and nothing you do can change that. My children are the future. How do we know that Mother's dead? Luke asked, easing onto a stool on the opposite side of the meal bar. Where's her grave? Who saw her die? Did you? No. How do we know she didn't leave Alderaan? Leave you on Alderaan to hide from Father? How do we know she didn't succeed? There's a simple answer to that, Leia said, raising her head. She's dead, Luke. If she was still alive, there'd be nothing to stop her from coming here for a reunion. She might be as young as 50, Luke said. It could still happen. It's been 12 years, Luke, she said, and we're not hard to find. At least I'm not. What does that mean? Asked Luke.
I'm going to tell you something I've kept from you, just because of the way you are about this thing.
Leia said slowly.
Since the end of the war, since I made Coruscant my home, and the work of the New Republic my life, there's been a steady stream of women coming here and claiming that they're our long-lost mother.
She looked to Han.
How many have there been now, honey?
More than 200, Han said, nodding. More of them lately, for some reason. Almost one a week so far this year.
The security staff calls them mad grannies,
Leia said.
Some of them aren't old enough by half. Some aren't even human. But they're all firmly in love with the idea that they married the monster and gave birth to the heroes of the rebellion.
She shook her head sadly. But there might be reasons we don't know of for her not to come, Luke said earnestly. She may need to protect those who protected her. She might not want to face our questions. For all she knows, we curse her memory. That's why we may have to find her. Please, Leia, let me look into your mind one more time. I have a signpost this time. A name.
And what if you find what you're looking for?
Then I'm going away with the woman who brought me the name. To find the rest. Leia raised her hands in exasperation.
You see? You see? There'll never be an end to it. You'll never be able to let it go.
I just have to know the truth, Luke said. I don't understand why you don't feel the same way.
Listen to me. We're never going to have a tidy family tree,
Leia snapped.
Why can't you realize? We're never going to know our parents better than we do right now. We're never going to have fond stories of our grandparents to tell our children. We're better off telling them about Owen and Beru, about Bale, the real people who cared for us, protected us, loved us like we were their own. You make too much of blood.
It's more than blood, Luke began.
I don't care,
Leia said, slapping the top of the bar with the flat of her right hand. The noise was so sudden and loud that it made Han jump.
You can't invent a normal childhood for us, no matter how much you turn up about mother and father. And if you do find the truth, as you call it, you just might find you don't like it very much. You might end up wishing you'd let them stay dead.
Could anything be worse than what we already know?
I'd rather not know the answer to that question,
Leia said curtly, pushing herself back from the bar so violently that her stool toppled to the floor as she slipped off it.
You and I are foundlings, Luke. That's how it is, like it or not. Our family tree starts here, with this family and these children, and they're going to know their parents and their uncle and all our wonderful friends.
Leia's face and voice filled with a rising fury as she spoke. Fury at the world, the past, at Luke, at all who stood as obstacles to her vision of what should be.
My children are going to have normal family stories to tell their children. Little funny stories about everyday nothings. Stories where no one dies too young or has to carry a burden of shame. I'm going to see to that, with your help or without it.
Han approached from the doorway. Leia...
Nothing matters more to me, do you understand?
She demanded, jabbing a finger in Luke's face.
Nothing. So you do what you think you have to, brother. Go wherever you have to, with whoever you want to, chasing whatever shadow of a hint of a promise of a clue you like. I don't care about any of it. Don't ask for my help again, and don't bring the past into this house. It's all just pain and death. You wallow in it if you want to. I've had enough of it for 10 lifetimes.
Stunned by the vehemence of her outburst, both men stood mute as Leia stalked out of the kitchen.
I'm sorry,
Luke said at last. You were right. I let myself think I know her better than you do. I don't know who's right and who's wrong, kid. I just know you're both stubborn as tauntauns, Han said, and that this would probably be a good time to be leaving. Luke did not argue. Like most small sport spacecraft with bold names, Akana's Verpine Adventurer offered few amenities, technical or personal. It had no weapons, combat shields, or astromech droid, and its sublight speed rating was a meager 2.5. The navigational deflector array had been upgraded to the Block 3 standard somewhere during its history, but its hyperdrive motivator was still Block 1. There was only a single pressurized compartment, which the flight stations shared with a single-width sleeper and tiny curtained refresher unit. The meal service console was limited to 3 drink selections, Akana explained apologetically, since she hadn't been able to afford repairs to the food dispensers. But the pilot station was roomy enough for Luke to forego his service flight suit in favor of looser, more casual clothing, and the small cargo hold had more than room enough for Luke's one modest bag beside Akana's luggage and supplies. "Is that all?" Akana shouted over the wind. "That's all," Luke said, retrieving a comm link from a concealed pocket. "Go on, get inside. You're shivering. Artie, can you hear me?" The comm link chirped brightly. Luke helped Akana climb through the narrow access chute, then moved away from the adventurer. "Artie, I'm going away for a while," he said, cupping the comm link in one bare hand. "Maintain Security Protocol 5. If anyone breaches the perimeter, send code Alpha 5Z Alpha on Control Channel 1. Acknowledge." R7T1 acknowledged the instructions obediently. It was innocent of the fact that the code it had been given would topple the Hermitage into the sea, shattering it on the rock spires and plunging the E-wing below the waves. "End link," Luke said, and switched the comm link off. Turning away, he returned to the adventurer and climbed the access ladder 2 rungs at a time. "Is everything all right?" Akana asked as he joined her. "Everything's fine," he said, pushing the lever that folded the ladder and sealed the hatch behind him. "Do you want the controls?" "That's not necessary," she said, slipping in the second seat. "If you don't mind, I'll help," Luke said as he buckled himself in. "But first, you have to tell me which way to point the little end of the ship." "Our destination is Lukaszek," she said. "That was our last home. We'll start our search there."